On September 10th, 2002, this game, Battlefield 1942, was released, and so began the rise of one of the greatest gaming series ever. The nostalgia runs so deep that I still get chills when I watch this intro. Thousands of hours into just this single game growing up, it was more like an experience, one which never got old. Flash forward 17 years to the present. The game series I love is still here, but it has lost its magic. In this age of PC FPS games, it could be argued that the Battlefield series still stands alone as the premier sandbox shooter whose gameplay features large maps and fully controllable planes, tanks, and ships. While many other sandbox games that include vehicles do exist, I contend that even at their worst, the Battlefield games are far and away more enjoyable and of a higher quality than other titles competing in this genre. But all good things do not last. Technologies change, original staff leave a studio, and gaming trends evolve. Perhaps the top leadership of a game studio develops an ego over time, and following success after success with each game in the series, they think they can't miss. This mindset leads to development focused on the delusion of what they think would be a great game, instead of what actually would improve the gameplay for their player base. An example of this would be stylization over substance, where the game may look like a work of art, but the gameplay suffers as a result. Many people might hear this and say that this mindset is exactly what happened with Battlefield 5, arguably the most incomplete game of the series at launch to date. Personally, I think that this also contributed to Battlefield 1 as well, albeit to a lesser extent. Battlefield 5 divided the community like no other right from the moment it was announced. From odd design decisions, lack of content, perpetual bugs, netcode problems, to simply the fact that it was a successive historical title. As a Battlefield veteran, I was ecstatic by the thought of playing another crazy, gigantic World War II Battlefield game some 17 years since Battlefield 1942 was released. Having massive tank battles on large desert maps, intricate dogfights over Europe, and even battleship combat in the Pacific, I was ready to embrace the nostalgia. While Battlefield 5 has slowly and steadily improved over the past year, and even with the major game update of the Pacific Theater, I still cannot shake my past feelings of outrage and frustration over this game's life, nor my ongoing disappointment of it. As a series-long fan, what can be done? Since Battlefield 5's release, I've reported cheaters and bugs on a regular basis, streamed the game for over 1,000 hours, defended the game's slow-moving progress to naysayers, and made countless suggestions of map design and balance changes to devs on Twitter. What more can a single player do? Waiting for the next game does nothing to help. The community has shrunk so much already, and I wouldn't blame people for screaming at DICE and not buying the next game after what has happened already. After finally being fed up one night, I took some time to myself to truly find some way to help the series, and more importantly the Battlefield community, and I came to this conclusion. Battlefield 5 cannot be salvaged. The community is too disheartened, the game too buggy, the content too scarce, and the player base too low to make it worthwhile to actively support it with massive new content launches for the next several months, let alone even years. So the question is, how does DICE salvage the series and reinvigorate the player base, and win back the fans? This is what I propose. It is time DICE makes a game for everyone. We are coming up on the 20th anniversary of the Battlefield franchise in 2022. To celebrate those 20 years, DICE should develop what I envision as a game called Best of Battlefield. Everything that follows in this video from this point details exactly what this game concept is, its game mechanics, and its features, many of which I strongly encourage DICE to adopt, regardless of the fact that this is just a concept. Section 1. Core Design. In my concept, 4 to 5 maps from nearly every single Battlefield title would be remade in the current or next iteration of the Frostbite engine, assuming that engine would still be utilized. This includes maps from Battlefield 1942, Battlefield Vietnam, Battlefield 2, Battlefield 2142, Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, Battlefield 1, and Battlefield 5. Not every game would be included on release, but would be utilized as DLC in major map packs of 6 to 8 maps, each focusing on a different set of Battlefield games, or what I will now call their era. The reason for releasing DLC in Battlefield eras is to significantly reduce the stress and workload of the development team. Each large DLC pack would aim to be released every 9 to 12 months. To begin, on launch, the base game would fall into the Modern Era category, consisting of maps from Battlefields 2, 3, and 4. I would start with this era because it is the one that the community clamors for the most, and has the most overlap among all of the games in terms of weapons and vehicles. Many weapons featured on Battlefield 2, 3, 4, Hardline, Bad Company, and even some from Vietnam would fit into this Modern Era category, while others might only need minor alterations. As just stated, the base game will launch in the Modern Era. The first major DLC package I would follow up with is the Vietnam Era, consisting of maps, weapons, vehicles, and game mechanics from Battlefield Vietnam and Battlefield Bad Company 2 Vietnam. The reasoning for following up in this era is to drive a large change of atmosphere and environment while still keeping some of the modern weapons accessible. It also allows DICE to reintroduce classic Battlefield Vietnam maps in new ways, such as including a rush or breakthrough variant for each map. Next, I would take the massive leap forward toward the Battlefield 2142 era. Consisting of 7 to 8 maps, the 2142 era DLC would include a hugely updated take on this classic Battlefield experience, complete with future weapons, hover tanks, battle walkers, and yes, Titans. This DLC would give many players their first ever exposure to Titan Assault, arguably one of the best game modes in the entire series. After the 2142 era, I would then return to World War I and World War II eras, consisting of smaller DLC packs at shorter intervals to provide a steady stream of content from Battlefields 1, 1942, and 5. As far as choosing the maps to be included in this best of game, I would include maps from the entire series which meet several criteria, including fan approval, overall map symmetry and balance, historical likelihood of one-sidedness, uniqueness, and balance between infantry-heavy maps and mixed vehicle infantry maps. I would also prioritize maps from the oldest Battlefield games over more recent ones in order to give new players the greatest experience. To give a couple examples, for Battlefield 1942, you might include Wake Island, complete with drivable ships, Coral Sea, Stalingrad, Anzio, and Midway. For Battlefield Vietnam, you might include Operation Flaming Dart, Operation Game Warden, Hue, 1968, and Saigon, 1968. For Battlefield 2, Mashtur City, Strike at Karkand, Kubra Dam, Zatar Wetlands, and Road to Jalalabad, and so on. One of the highlights of bringing back updated versions of established maps is that a huge portion of the Battlefield community would not have had the opportunity to experience these maps or their great gameplay. The Battlefield series is almost 20 years old. How many players just started playing Battlefield games after Battlefield 3, or 4, or 1, or even 5? This would be a huge selling point. One major point that needs to be made. Some might argue that the amount of maps and eras that I'm asking for far exceeds what's actually achievable. I do not believe this is the case. In this best of Battlefield concept, there would be no single-player experience. Without this massive endeavor of its own, it frees up numerous level designers, art designers, modelers, and animators to focus entirely on the multiplayer experience. Section 2. Core Gameplay. Now let's talk weapon and vehicle orientation. Each map will have map-specific vehicles, akin to how vehicles are placed on maps in Battlefield 4. For each era of maps, say World War II, you would have to use World War II era guns. Modern era weapons are restricted to modern era maps. and 2142 weapons restricted to those maps. I do not believe this weapon restriction is too extreme of a challenge for a developer, as many games will overlap. Many World War I weapons were used in World War II. Battlefield 2142 would be the extreme exception, as it is all fictional. One downside to this is that some players might be confused as to why they can't use their favorite weapon across all maps. But to be fair, I think it would break some of the immersion if a player got to use a 2142 era weapon on World War I and World War II maps, and vice versa. Each loading screen therefore must clearly state what era the map is you are loading in order to mitigate confusion. Additionally, if players want to have a blast with their favorite gun across all eras, a server-side option for unranked play should allow all game weapons across all maps. I think in the short term the community might have to accept not getting every gun from every Battlefield game, but I do believe this is a sacrifice they would be willing to make. Many vehicles from the modern era would also overlap, such as certain tanks and planes. Would this type of game be a giant challenge for the vehicle team? I think that the amount of vehicles needed would actually be fairly similar to the amount already needed in some previous Battlefield games. And by working backward, that is to say, based on the map that you know is being made, you already know what vehicles should be on it. And you can limit the amount of vehicles that need to be made. For example, just by taking the Battlefield 2 maps that I suggested earlier, you require a minimum 6 types of planes, 2 tanks, 2 IFVs, 2 attack helicopters, 2 transports, and 2 mobile AA vehicles. But this is just for the Battlefield 2 maps I listed. If you added most vehicles from Battlefield 3 and 4 to this total to reflect the fact that these games would be released together as one era, you might find that the total number of vehicles from each category rise only slightly, with planes being the big multiplier. The number of planes can be significantly reduced by strategically choosing maps to remake, and by not necessarily using the same plane as was in the original map. Consider that currently in Battlefield 5 there are already 18 tanks, 8 planes, and an assortment of transport vehicles. Granted, they are not the size of a Battlefield 2142 Titan or an aircraft carrier, but I do think it is doable. Now for the gameplay. I do not believe you can have a cross-era game like this and keep every feature from every Battlefield. I think you need to keep what works and eliminate what doesn't, keeping in mind what players like and what players hate. What follows is a rundown of exactly what I propose. Let's begin. Number 1. The sliding mechanic from Battlefield 5 should stay. It is a simple mechanic which adds slight depth to infantry play and is pretty easy to implement. Number 2. Parachutes need to be deployable again at a much shorter fall distance. This mechanic made for short falls, better sneak attacks, and much more strategic movements. Number 3. The complete removal of the Battlefield 5 attrition system. You fully heal automatically from damage over time. I am strongly in favor of medic classes being able to toss medpacks to non-medics so that, in addition to passively healing slowly, they can use the medpack to quickly heal themselves whenever they need to. I think the hotkey to self-heal with a medpack was one of Battlefield 5's great innovations, as opposed to tossing the medpack on the ground and hoping you picked it up. Number 4. The complete removal of animations for everything. I get that it makes Battlefield 5 look far more cinematic. However, I personally believe players want it gone. It was a fun experiment, but it causes far more bugs than it's worth. Most importantly, it removed elements that made the Battlefield series fun. Chaos, skilled movements, lucky bails, stolen vehicles, stunts, and tricks. Number 5. The squad revive system from Battlefield 5 should stay. Being able to revive squad mates without being a meta class has fundamentally changed how revives work, and reviving is far more frequent in Battlefield 5 than past titles. This is another great change for the series and should be applied backward to all eras in this game concept, as well as in all future Battlefield titles. Number 6. No commanders. As not all previous Battlefield titles had commanders, it would be far simpler and a major time saver to exclude this concept altogether, considering it would only affect a few maps in the game. A strong suggestion would be to continue using the requisition point squad call-in system from Battlefield 5 to replace many items that the commanders previously held, excluding cruise missiles and artillery. However, calling in supplies, transportation vehicles, and other features such as area EMPs, which would partially disable the battle walkers, smoke barrages, and UAVs, might be a welcome addition. Number 7. No game-changing call-ins. No artillery strike call-in or weapons of mass destruction like cruise missiles, super trains, airships, or destroyers with easy-to-use pinpoint targeting systems. However, given the surprisingly balanced nature of V1s in Battlefield 5, I'm willing to let those stay in World War II maps. Number 8. Simplify your game modes. Do not reinvent the wheel. Battlefield is Conquest. Limit your alternative game modes. If you want to include a new Grand Ops mode retroactively, that might be interesting, but keep your game modes to a minimum. Infantry-heavy players should not be ignored. In this player's opinion, Frontlines, Breakthrough, and Conquest are the game modes that should be focused on the most. Number 9. The Choose Your Vehicle spawn UI from Battlefield 5 should be removed, as you cannot possibly make every vehicle for just a few maps in certain cases. Battlefield 5 maps and Battlefield 1 maps in this game concept will need to have predetermined vehicles on maps. Number 10. The vehicle deployment screen from Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5 needs to be removed in favor of the deployment screen from Battlefield 4, and the deployment UI in general needs a major quality pass. To this day I still don't know what bug was persistently in the deployment UI from Battlefield 1 and BF5, but the deployment screens in both games constantly made vehicles either take far too long to spawn than they should, never spawn at all, or never update for the player but update for teammates, allowing them to drive away newly spawned vehicles. Nor did captured flags properly update on the map to reflect the correct owner and provide a new spawn point. The Battlefield 4 system was clean and reliable. Go back to it. Number 11. The re-establishment of epic music at important locations in the game. The music of the Battlefield series has always been top-notch. Battlefield 5 was no exception. What the series has slouched on lately is the end-of-round screens and the main menu music. Older Battlefield games had at least some strong theme on a round win. Now? Yay, I guess we won. It is such a minor detail, but one that sticks with gamers, and makes them feel proud when they triumph in that super close round. The menus are the other important place for powerful music, especially in a war game. As beautiful as some of Battlefield 5's themes might be, I don't want it to put me to sleep or relax me. I want it to hype me up the moment I log in and carry my enthusiasm while I customize settings, weapons, and wait in queue. Number 12. The re-establishment of vehicular ammo regeneration. The vehicle resupply station feature from Battlefield 5 needs to be removed in favor of the ammo reload method from Battlefield 4. To take a fairly slow-moving tank and then have to backtrack several hundred meters back to a resupply station and out of combat is boring and it wastes time. Better to have unlimited ammo supply in tanks, but make it regenerate slowly. This system still restricted tank shell abuse, and made conserving ammo to fight other tanks a major decision. Number 13. Standardized aircraft weapon and health mechanics. Speaking of vehicle reloading, many different methods of reloading aircraft ordnance have been utilized in the Battlefield series. In order to make my game concept work, a single methodology must work across all games and all eras. To that end, in Best of Battlefield, aircraft will reload all missiles and bombs in the fashion of aircraft from Battlefield 3, 4, and 1. This eliminates the need for BF5's air reload system, which forces the pilot out of combat for too long a time, while still maintaining a weapon cooldown. This system is also the easiest to balance for. Each era will simply need to be balanced a little differently based off of the different technology. But since each era would be released as a large DLC, there would be sufficient time to tweak the ordnance reload rates. Additionally, adding this mechanic to games that did not have it in the first place, Battlefields 1942 through 2142, would in fact retroactively balance out some of the overpowered aircraft that were in those games, making the map experience even better. This system also removes the necessity to significantly alter the weapon reload mechanics of helicopters in the modern and Vietnam eras, since that would be confusing and unnecessarily add new places to reload on old maps. For vehicle health, the system is again simplified to avoid as much confusion and complication across the eras. All vehicles will passively repair themselves slowly as in most Battlefield games, unless at critically low HP. This removes the in-flight repair system from Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5. Once below 15 HP, the aircraft will begin to slowly lose health unless repaired by an outside source. This drop in health would be slow, like in Battlefield 3, and give the pilot enough time to either bail at a safe location or land their aircraft to repair it. On maps that include aircraft carriers or airfields, this repair mechanic would also make a return. Flying over runways would quickly repair the vehicle and once again provide that amazing feeling of just barely making it back to the airfield with a plane on fire with 5 HP or less. Number 14. A return to Battlefield 4 flight mechanics and the removal of wing damage. Plane physics need to be easy to learn and difficult to master. Any player should be able to fly planes at a basic level, but dogfighting should be intricate and competitive. Turning should be based off of a plane's speed, with a maximum turn rate at a certain speed forcing a player to learn to control a plane more effectively. In addition, planes should slow down at a much slower rate to eliminate the Battlefield 5 meta of constantly stalling to win a dogfight. Lastly, wing and tail damage to aircraft would be removed, for one because it would ruin the dogfight mechanics of past Battlefield games, but more importantly because it ruins the enjoyment of a fair dogfight. Getting winged by a few lucky shots and then being guaranteed to not be able to turn as well as your opponent means an almost certain loss and discourages players from flying. Number 15. No sweet spot mechanic for sniper rifle damage. I'm looking at you, Battlefield 1. Number 16. Very limited suppression. Most players still have nightmares over the suppression in Battlefield 3. Let's make sure we never go back to anything close to it. Number 17. Reworked 3D spotting. 3D spotting is a tool that was introduced in Battlefield 3 and was largely viewed positively by the community. The absence of this mechanic in Battlefield 5 has been marked by noticeable frustration, due in large part to player model visibility. Working under the assumption that any future Battlefield game works on a graphics engine equal to or more realistic than the current Frostbite engine, it makes sense that the best of Battlefield would feature 3D spotting. However, I would make some slight balance changes toward it. The 3D spot marked on an enemy infantry would disappear after a few short seconds, and only briefly last on the target if they move beyond line of sight. Spotted vehicles would remain spotted for a much longer duration for balance purposes, giving players more knowledge of where and when to counter them. Lastly, one criticism of 3D spotting has been that the recon classes trying to flank on a wide route or snipe under cover have had their positions blown by a simple key press from a player. Best of Battlefield would only allow players of a sniper or recon class to 3D spot other snipers. One last thing. Any player using a mortar would briefly show up on the minimap. Number 18. Glancing blows need to be removed or have the odds of occurring significantly reduced. Two main reasons for this. It's realistic, sure, but as a player, it's frustrating and extremely annoying when it happens multiple times in a row, especially at angles where it shouldn't be happening at all. Secondly, for competitive play, adding a mechanic like this where accurate shots register as a glance means that the better player in a fight might actually lose the fight purely based off of luck. Additionally, as glancing blows were only introduced in Battlefield 1, introducing such a frustrating feature into past Battlefield environments would be a poor design choice. Number 19. Map fortifications introduced in Battlefield 5 would be removed. Another system that is well intentioned. It would take far too long to implement across many classic maps, and more importantly, drastically add to the development time of future maps. Number 20. Balance between vehicles and anti-vehicle weapons. No weapon should have the ability to reach across most of a map, especially on the smaller ones. This is specifically regarding anti-air missiles, mobile AA, and flak AA. Active radar missiles would no longer disable a plane on hit. They would also have a minimum and maximum arming range. Modern era mobile AA would have locked 30mm guns. Damage would remain extremely high for these guns. However, past a certain range, there would be an incremental damage drop-off. Flak guns, stationary, and flak-based mobile AA would do far higher damage to planes the closer they are to them, and damage would drop off significantly the farther away the plane is. The SOFLAM and target designators would not be a guaranteed critical hit, and would have a lower effective range but still keep the bonus damage effect. SOFLAMs would also have a hitbox size larger than that of a Sparrow. MBT laws and any auto-locking, easy-to-use projectiles would do less damage than dumbfire anti-tank rockets, which would receive a slight buff to compensate. Auto-locking staff shells for tanks would be removed from the game. In addition, to compensate for stronger stationary anti-air weapons, the flight ceiling at every map would be increased. To prevent unstoppable high-altitude bombing, above a certain altitude the map below becomes far more difficult to see due to draw distance and cloud cover. Any planes with bombs would have their bombing sites removed past a certain altitude. Alternatively, past a certain altitude, bombs dropped from planes would have a great chance of missing the target by wandering off at incremental degrees that increase with plane altitude. Aircraft missile defense systems like ECM and flares would have a slightly increased cooldown time in order to give ground forces a better chance against great pilots. The cooldown of heat seekers, passive and active radar missiles and jets and helicopters would also be increased to compensate for this. The active protection system on armored vehicles will block TV-guided missiles instead of going through them due to game programming which considers the missile itself a vehicle. Let's talk helicopters for a minute. Helicopters in Battlefield have always walked a fine line between underpowered and overpowered. My goal is to add a bit more balance to them. To start, when a game is leaning pretty one-sided, helicopters sometimes have a hard time taking off due to aircraft abuse. To account for this, attack and transport helicopters will take 25% less damage from 20mm cannons on jets, and take 10% less damage from 25mm guns, with no change in 30mm cannon damage. These values are based on Battlefield 4 damage values. Second, to balance the slightly nerfed mobile AA gun range, attack helicopter pilot missile range would have a maximum range equivalent to the range at which mobile AA damage hits 75% per bullet. TV and guided missile range would remain unaffected, although they would be able to be blocked by active protection. Third, one of the main complaints about helicopters is that due to the number of players which may be on the opposite team, the number of anti-air weapons makes flying incredibly difficult on larger, more open maps. The best solution to this is to reduce handheld anti-air missile damage, like Stingers and Iglas, per hit to be about 20 to 35% of total helicopter health. This missile damage reduction would not apply to any vehicle aside from transport and attack helicopters. However, to balance this out on maps where there is more cover to find, stationary and mounted machine guns on tanks, IFVs, and buggies would do far greater damage to attack helicopters within a few hundred meters. Light helicopters like Little Birds, should they maneuver as well as they do in Battlefield 4, would take minimal, scratch-like damage per a few rounds of normal small arms weapons fire. This change, albeit minor, would offer one more solution to dealing with expert Little Bird pilots. Number 21. LMG-MMG balance. Battlefield players have a love-hate relationship with light and medium machine guns. Sure, it's fun to spray a ton of rounds at a group of enemies, but in many Battlefield games these weapons just never seem to nail that fine balance. Battlefield 5 introduced medium machine guns as a support kit weapon classification in Battlefield 5 to differentiate them from light machine guns. Past Battlefield games included some medium machine guns, but never made this distinction. Best of Battlefield would keep MMG classification to these weapons, including from the inevitable World War II era DLC. To be clear, the MMGs of Battlefield 5 and the LMGs of Battlefields 3 and 4 each have their own unique problems, and fixing them requires different strategies. Any weapons discussed in this section are belt or box-fed machine guns. Magazine-fed machine guns would not be affected by what follows. While DICE did a much better job to balance medium machine guns in Battlefield 5, introducing significant weapon recoil and bullet spread while crouching or standing, weapon heat generation, and being unable to ADS unless prone or bipoded, three major issues remained: the insistence on being prone, the camping meta, and player visibility. Let's start with player visibility. To solve this problem, there are 3 solutions. First, 3D spotting would drastically affect the MMG support player. Best of Battlefield would already include this feature. Second, upon performing a fully automatic spray of more than 30 rounds, the MMG player would appear briefly on the minimap. Third, although unlikely and honestly the least necessary, the art design and color palette of player models would be improved to make a better distinction between player and terrain. Next, the camping meta. 4 solutions here. The first and second solutions are 3D spotting and the minimap spot after fully automatic fire. Third, a much more forgiving bipod mechanic. If 3D spotting is to be a thing, then the class needs to be able to reposition more frequently. Bipods would deploy far more reliably on windows, rubble, vehicles, and well, everything. It would also deploy better on lower terrain that isn't necessarily at window height. Fourth, the recoil and bullet spread of medium machine guns would be reduced when crouched, compared to what it is currently in Battlefield 5. Both this reduction and the more forgiving bipod should significantly incentivize more movement and less camping a position. Prone. Prone play should be viable, but it cannot be overpowered. To that end, MMGs would be forced to use bursts of 25 to 50 rounds, depending on the weapon's rate of fire. After exceeding this limit, the crosshairs expand significantly in a large cone of fire, which, although having a large spread, doesn't make it impossible to eliminate enemies at close range. Will these changes stop a player from being killed by medium machine gun supports? No. Will these changes reduce the ability to get kills with these weapons? Maybe slightly. But these changes are well deserved. Taken together, they would be a huge balance change for World War II era medium machine guns. If these mechanics had been implemented in Battlefield 5, it would have been a whole new ballgame. As for modern era light machine guns, the most prominent issues facing LMGs are a balance between damage, accuracy, and utility. Battlefield 3 was the gold standard to look toward for LMG balance. In Best of Battlefield, LMGs would provide the greatest amount of suppression effect in the game relative to other class weapons. Similar to a change recommended for World War II era medium machine guns, LMGs would have an accurate initial burst fire of 15 to 30 rounds, depending on weapon rate of fire. That first burst, while still having a small spread, would be far more accurate than continuing to fire, and this gives the player you are shooting at time to react should you miss the initial burst and need to recenter the crosshair. Weapon attachments, such as bipods, would be focused primarily on reducing recoil rather than adjusting for accuracy. For both LMGs and MMGs, the focus of other weapon attachments would be reducing maximum bullet spread in fully automatic fire. Number 22. Battlefield 4 style weapon and vehicle customizations. This system was the most effective and easiest to navigate when it came to how to choose to upgrade your weapons and vehicles. The Battlefield 5 system is overburdened by too many screens to navigate and extra required UI input that takes too much time as a player to confirm you have everything the way you want it. On top of that, you still cannot customize your vehicle loadouts while waiting in the deployment screen unless a vehicle has already been selected. Number 23. No more knifing, melee kill animations, and no counter knifing. Here's the deal, these animations look cool, sure, but realistically players often die more frequently while they are knifing somebody than if they just shot the person. If you are in a situation where you run out of ammo and you need to melee, you should be able to use your melee weapon without going into a long animation which leaves you vulnerable for up to several seconds, when you could either be reloading or getting to a safe place. Best of Battlefield would no longer include these long animations, and instead only feature the swing of the melee weapon itself. Like in Battlefield games of old, this also allows fun and hilarious knife fighting moments where two players would engage in melee briefly for an epic moment, or when a player had a chance to go on a crazy knifing killing spree. Regardless of the melee weapon you are using, each hit would do approximately 50 damage, and a headshot would be a guaranteed kill. Number 24. Players must be able to switch teams. If a server does not want to make this possible, then they should have the right to restrict it via a server-side option. Not being able to switch teams frustrates players when they want to play with friends, causes anger when the teams end up being 30 versus 10 and it's unfixable, and allows for competitive players to load onto the correct team. In addition, a server-side option would be available to scramble both teams at the end of each round while not breaking up any squads. Number 25. Map balancing features. Heavy bombers. In Battlefield 1942, the B-17 was the king. Sure, there was the Ju-88 on one map, but that was unique. Arguably one of the worst features of Battlefield 5 was to include the option of medium and heavy bombers on virtually every map. The wisdom here was that if 2 planes were allowed per team, and one team chose 2 bombers, the other team would get a fighter and shoot them down. Well, this doesn't always happen. Even when it does, many fighter pilots are too inexperienced to take down an experienced pilot in an upgraded bomber. Even worse, both teams might just go all bombers and completely ignore each other for most of the round. In any case, these heavy bombers create an immensely frustrating game experience for tanks and infantry players throughout the round. In Battlefield 1942, only a handful of maps contained a B-17, and as the opposing team's pilot, you knew to hunt for it. On one map, Gazala, it was parked at a non-flag out in the middle of nowhere, allowing either team to get it. Best of Battlefield would remove all heavy bombers unless they are on a predetermined map and the number is limited to 1 or 2. Gimme flag vehicles. Over the course of the Battlefield series, we have seen anti-stomping measures added over time. The most obvious additions are the automatic base AA system, and more importantly, restricted enemy map zones preventing spawn camping in the uncapturable bases. I would like to add one more. One of Battlefield's worst tendencies in Conquest is the vehicle snowball effect, where upon capturing all or most of the flags on a map, one team gains access to all of the bonus vehicles that spawn there. Best of Battlefield would change this slightly, adding the gimme flag mechanic. If your team captures your team's closest flag, the gimme flag, and an important vehicle spawns there, like an LAV, tank, or helicopter, these vehicles would spawn normally. If the enemy team captures this flag, these important vehicles will not spawn, slightly reducing the vehicle imbalance ratio. Finally, the Conquest-only catch-up mechanic from Battlefield 5 will make a return. When a team is down in tickets by a significant margin, namely 300 or more, flags will capture at a faster rate incrementally from that point forward depending on the ticket gap. This system was an intuitive method to try to balance out Conquest gameplay, and although the system was too extreme on launch, it deserves to be included because it can continue to be tweaked and balanced. Number 26. Repair tool changes. Applying and expanding on the same concept from the Squad Revive system, the Engineer class should not be the only class capable of repairing vehicles. They would just do it the most effectively. If every other class could repair, but only at a reduced amount, it would open the door to encouraging greater team play. In Best of Battlefield, this would work in the modern era by giving the Engineer class a blowtorch repair tool, while for every other class, use the T key to pull up a wrench, making a visible distinction. However, in order to avoid repair tool abuse, a vehicle would have a maximum repair rate equal to 2 engineers repairing simultaneously, or 4 to 5 non-engineers. In addition, to emphasize the importance of repairing vehicles and teaching new players that this is possible, a wrench in the lower right corner of the gunner screen, where the weapon selection normally is, would appear and pulsate similar to the medic bandage icon in Battlefield 5 right now, but only appear when tank health is below 65%. At the same time, points awarded for repairing vehicles should be greatly increased. Right now it only gives about 10 points for every 15 or so odd HP repaired. If it was 100 points per 15 to 20 HP repaired, players would get much greater incentive to repair. And honestly, it is only fair. Repairing is a pretty dangerous action because you effectively place yourself as the primary target for enemy players when they're engaging a tank. and you can't even defend yourself since you put away your weapons to use the repair tool. Number 27. No Iron Man battle pickups. Featured most prominently in Battlefield 1, no battle pickup should make the user nigh invulnerable while putting out incredible damage at the same time. Lastly, number 28. No Levolutions. Levolutions added a great new dynamic to map design in Battlefield 4, and while I personally hope that this feature makes a return in a future Battlefield title, Best of Battlefield would not include it even on returning Battlefield 4 maps. Section 3. Anti-cheat. So now we have covered the concept of the game. I imagine this concept might be received positively by gamers and generate a lot of hype. But how do we really bring back the community to Battlefield? First, DICE needs to restore trust to the player base by implementing a stricter anti-cheat system than what currently exists in Battlefield 5. In past titles, anti-cheat was handled through Fairfight and Punkbuster, and while both definitely helped significantly reduce the amount of cheaters in-game, it was not 100% effective and frequently resulted in false positive bans. We barely know anything about DICE's anti-cheat system in Battlefield 5, and it is understandable that some things should be kept a secret. However, some information is better than nothing at all. In order to support the most effective anti-cheat policy for Battlefield, a multi-step process is required. Number 1. Without revealing how their system works, DICE needs to reassure the community of the quality of their anti-cheat system by regularly providing the community with the numbers of players banned per week and per month. They also need to drastically streamline the process of reporting cheaters, instead of sending reports through Origin, being forced to register on a forum, or tweeting directly to a dev. Number 2. The implementation of private servers and local admins. Private servers, especially those run by large gaming communities, historically have fewer numbers of cheaters on their servers, and have a far faster response time to banning players due to having multiple server admins on duty or readily available to perform duties. More on private servers in a minute. Number 3. The implementation of a first-person kill cam. The Battlefield series has never had such a feature in any of its games. I recently asked a senior developer at DICE why a feature like this has never existed. Their response was, "I honestly don't know." I am not a game developer, but I can make one assumption that perhaps the server resources required to make this a reality may be too great for servers already supporting the chaos of 64 players. That being said, if Call of Duty can now manage to have it with their Ground War game mode, Battlefield players deserve an explanation for not having this feature. This would greatly make anti-cheat support better for infantry-only servers as well as for competitive game modes. It might even provide a fun and interestingly new perspective for those only in Battlefield moments. In addition, given the amount of tools for gamers which allow them to clip and record their gameplay, it would offer a chance to collect irrefutable proof of cheaters. Section 4. Community. The next feature this concept Battlefield game would have in order to grow the community, and should be in every future Battlefield game anyway, is private or rental servers on launch. I cannot emphasize enough the damage that has been done to the Battlefield community since the essential neutering of private servers. Private servers were the foundation of the multiplayer community from Battlefield 1942 to Battlefield 4. It allowed communities to name and customize servers to align with their theme. It drew new players toward those communities and to develop online friendships that let these communities grow and thrive. It popularized a home server concept where players frequented just a few servers which they enjoyed the most, becoming known to other players as server regulars, thus again creating new friendships. Additionally, these communities often worked together to create new content for the community, whether it was machinima, stunt videos, or just a group of jokers filling up their passworded servers just to fool around, all of which went the way of the dodo once private servers vanished. Speaking of machinima or stunt videos, some of my fondest Battlefield memories are still the community-made parodies of Battlefield 2, of which I have little doubt was viewed by far more gamers than just Battlefield players. There was once a time where there were hundreds, if not thousands, of community Battlefield websites around the world at one point. Bringing back private servers on launch is a mandatory step toward replanting these communities that once existed. The casual player base wasn't the only group to benefit from private servers. From Battlefield 1942 on, the competitive community thrived in the Battlefield series, although by Battlefield 4 it was exhausted, shrinking, and largely relegated to very small 8v8 leagues and 5v5 rush. Private servers, in conjunction with competitive websites like Cal, TeamWarfare.com, and ESL, along with dedicated members of the competitive community, hosted, administered, and grew the competitive Battlefield scene through sheer enjoyment of the game. There was almost never a prize, and it was just to see who the best was. Perhaps without private servers, one of the first ever televised esports competitions in North America, the Championship Gaming Series, would never have included Battlefield 2. Competition gives a game staying power. Competitive players always look forward to the next season, the next match, the next scrim. They help keep a game populated and popular. And now with the popularity of esports, there is great potential to have such a great community thrive again. An interesting note here is that DICE once supported the first and only Battlefield 2 World Tournament, which, although long forgotten, was impossible without private servers. Competitive Battlefield will always have a special place in my heart. I have such incredible memories playing with teams in leagues for over a decade. Today's new generation of Battlefield players cannot have anything close to the experience that I did. Even for those players now who want to make competitive play happen, the current struggle to do so is depressing. I want these players to experience the full thrill of competitive Battlefield in an environment where the game provides those tools to make it possible, and best of Battlefield would. Section 5. Mod support. So now we have our base game, potential DLC, community, and competitive support through private servers, and the most effective way to deal with cheaters. Now let's give our best of Battlefield its staying power, and its greatest selling point. Once upon a time, the Battlefield series had a thing called mod support. All Battlefield games until the release of Battlefield 3 included mod support, and it allowed for some of the most creative, chaotic, and downright professional alterations to the base game. There were Star Wars mods, chiefly Galactic Conquest, World War I and World War II mods, mods for Transformers, Pirates, stunts, notably Interstate 82, which was like a combination of Gary's mod and Grand Theft Auto, dogfight mods, sci-fi mods, graphics, sounds, and music mods, everything you can think of really. And then there was a Battlefield 1942 mod called Desert Combat, arguably one of the greatest mods ever made, which, as of this recording, still has players. Obviously, in the present day, if you want ranked gameplay, you probably cannot be running mods on a server. I believe the community would be okay with this, but they should be separate entities. I staunchly hold that the enormous growth and success of the Battlefield series is due in large part to these mods. Sure, only a decent percentage of the total player base may have even touched mods, but it was enough to create headlines on forums and game websites, and expose the Battlefield series to people who would otherwise never have seen it, and perhaps contributed to new players picking up the game so that they could get in on the action. It is worth noting that if provided the tools, game mechanics removed from the base game concept, like artillery or airships, could be reintroduced in new and unique mods for players to continue to enjoy them, albeit in an unranked game mode. One conceptual challenge to implementing mod support in a new Battlefield is, how are you able to bring mods to console players? There is no simple answer here. One idea is to create a community mod manager position at DICE, whose sole responsibility is to work with mod makers who submit their content to them. If approved, a mod will then be available on the Mods tab on a console player's main menu screen, where they will then be able to download the mod. Then, either through a console community renting a server or DICE providing a limited amount of servers for a mod. The console community can enjoy this feature as well, perhaps a few highlighted mods of the month. Mod support also had a substantial effect on the competitive community. It allowed players to create a competitive-only mod in Battlefield 2, balancing weapons and maps ever so slightly. Mods allowed map makers to create size-appropriate versions of maps perfect for 8v8 or 12v12 competitive modes of the day, to avoid fighting on giant maps far too big to play on, a problem that plagued competitive teams in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. Therefore, in this all-encompassing game celebrating all that Battlefield is, it seems only appropriate to return this feature to the fans. It will thoroughly increase player retention, drive new sales, and just make the Battlefield community extremely happy. Lastly, in order to address an issue currently pressing Battlefield 5, let's talk about maps. Let's face it, some maps are duds, while others become legend. More maps are always a good thing in that they increase the chance of finding those winners. They also significantly diversify the game, excite players, allow for new map rotations, and, most importantly, keep the game from feeling stale. Since Battlefield 5's release, DICE has promised much in the way of new maps, but compared with past Battlefield titles, it has fallen tremendously short, especially when compared to the same post-release timeframe. While mod support should largely encompass this, I want to make it clear, mod support means that DICE should provide the map-making tools to the community. If DICE is having such a difficult time pumping out maps, the community should be given a chance to help out. There are numerous, dedicated, and immensely skilled modders and mapmakers in the world who would jump at the chance to create something new. They have done it before in previous Battlefield titles, and they can do it again. While many maps created by the community could be allowed to automatically be used in unranked game modes on private servers, another option is for DICE to set up a submission tool, where near-final maps can be sent to a specialized map team at DICE, perhaps to a community map manager, who would interact with the community on this issue. These submitted maps can then be reviewed, tested, and even finalized before being released as official maps in ranked play. This creates an additional stream of newly created content for Best of Battlefield, and engages the community in a positive way. Section 6. Best of Battlefield. Taking everything together, this is what this fictional game amounts to. Number 1. A Battlefield game to celebrate the entire series from Battlefield 1942 to Battlefield 5, with maps, guns, vehicles, and game mechanics from all different eras. Number 2. Enough content across several eras of Battlefield games to provide several years worth of DLC. Number 3. Private servers on launch to help build back up the community through casual collaborations and competitive game modes. Number 4. A staunch anti-cheat system with regular updates about progress to ban cheaters in order to recapture trust on the issue, and coupled with server admins' ability to remove cheaters quickly and effectively from servers. Number 5. Mod support included at release or soon after as a catalyst to promote community creativity, help promote the game, create those only in Battlefield moments, keep the game thriving for years, drive additional sales, and simply just make it fun. And number 6, a map-making tool for the community to create and submit map designs to DICE to validate and review, and eventually be released as official content for the game. This is my Best of Battlefield game concept, designed to reinvigorate the Battlefield franchise and prepare it for the next 20 years. Its intention is to build back up the trust between community player base and developer, the reestablishment of competitive Battlefield, and just having a game that both DICE and gamers can be proud to play and support. I know I am overlooking some things. There are definitely ideas here that might not work, or might have some issues. My goal was to make a Battlefield game concept that I would want, and after probably close to 20,000 hours in the Battlefield series over 17 years, I drew on features that stood out most to me and that I know for a fact players enjoyed. Please feel free to debate and politely criticize, but remember, this is just my dream. It is DICE that you need to convince to make it. Thank you, take care, and see you on the battlefield.